Hello again, everyone. Edwin Learnard back once again. In this YouTube astrological segment, I'm going to be talking about astrology and introversion. Now, well, I have my chart is almost like you could set up a prototype for introversion. In astrology, I have a preponderance of planets below the horizon, which of course are houses 1 through 6. I have the 2 planets above the horizon. Saturn in the 12th, which could be reclusive, and I also have Neptune in the 7th house, which could be about the dissipation or dissolving of relationships. Now, the thing about this too, that's obviously, one indicator of introversion in a chart could be preponderance of planets below the horizon. If you have the majority, of your planets or major astrological energy in feminine signs, this could be another indicator right there. A person could have, an extroverted chart, but what happens, if you have somebody that has most of the planets above the horizon and they're mainly in masculine signs, and they have an ascendant that's masculine. The person will likely be very gregarious and extroverted, but let's say by progression things could happen too, and that person that has that very gregarious chart, might show little signs of wanting more privacy, more time by his or her self. And transit sometimes can play a role in this as well. If you got something where you got Saturn traversing or transiting your 12th house, it could be a period where you're a lot more introspective and introverted than you were ordinarily, regardless of where everything else is in your chart. Now, if you got an introverted chart to begin with and you have a transit like that, then you really might be very confined to yourself. Right now, I have transit Chiron in transit Uranus in my 12th house right now. Now, when transit Uranus hits one's 12th house, that could be indicative of an unusual need for some kind of solitude or seclusion, which might be mind-boggling to others. Difference with that and some other transits to the 12th is that, remember that Uranus is connected with what's unusual. People might misconstrue this because they might say that that's really unorthodox or unusual, when it really might not be, and have that need for seclusion. So I think that's what part of how that manifests with transit Uranus, if it's hitting one's 12th house. And it might be, some cases it might be some kind of personality changes slightly, that it might be misconstrued for something else, such as a mental illness. Remember that the 12th house is connected with that. I also, you could look at really, if you want to look at some asteroids or what have you. I have Juno in my 12th house in my natal chart, so that could indicate really being married to seclusion, so to speak, such as like it's an indelible fixture of mine. And the thing about this too isn't even, I understand this is a generational planet, but look at this though. I have Uranus in the Uranus conjunct almost exactly conjunct my 6th house cusp. It's in Libra. Now, I know by sign it's really not that relevant, but think about this. Uranus in Libra by itself in some cases could indicate maybe somebody that's rebelling from conventional or some typical relationship situation, might find more harmony in there as far as having relationships that are connected with the internet. The fact that it's making almost exact conjunction to my 6th house cusp, of course, that could be about putting this into the daily routine, something that is done on a day-to-day basis. Now, some other indicators which might be a little bit more subtle as far as astrology and introversion goes, well, like in my case, I have, again, the preponderance of my planetary energy is below the horizon, and my ascendant is in a feminine sign as well. It's in Taurus. In Taurus, of course, sometimes it's hard to get Taurus to go anywhere. They're very much often dominated by their domestic interests. It's a little bit different than Cancer energy. I do have a Cancer sun, but the thing about it is, with Taurus is more connected with the home, just for the simple enjoyment of home activities. Cancer is more enamored with their home life, I think, because they are just synonymous with the home and their family. It's more about their family, I think, is why Cancer has their tie to the home, and they're connected with what's at home to them. It could be nostalgic things in their home as well. But the thing too is what I'm going to get at. Sometimes the chart type can really play a role too in this, because I have a bold chart and most of that energy is on the bottom half of the chart. So, I mean, bold people can be very self-contained, very engrossed, dominated by their own interests, and the fact that that energy is on that bottom half, most of it is on that bottom half of the chart, shows that it's really about, me, my own interests, and into myself. I'm really, it shows that I'm very much in myself, and I'm very introspective. Again, that could be tied into the Saturn in my 12th house, and even I have Saturn conjunct the ascendant. Sometimes if you have Saturn conjunct the ascendant, and even if you have somewhat extroverted gregarious chart, you got to factor that in, because the person may be somewhat inhibited as far as their demeanor goes, their outer demeanor, with Saturn conjunct the ascendant. And I really believe that Saturn in the 12th house is very strong for people that may want to retreat from, or now say cower, or maybe escape society to some degree. I had a friend of mine some years ago who had a Gemini rising, and he was a Leo sun. He was, he's shown a lot of certain extroversion, gregariousness, like people that were close to me. He did have, I think, it's like 7 planets were below the horizon in his chart, but he had Saturn in the 12th house, and he even said to me one time, we were going by, I think it was a McDonald's restaurant, he said to me, man, I hate lots of people, or something. And I really believe that Saturn in the 12th, for whatever reason, is very, it really exerts the energy on the chart very strongly, I believe. And Saturn in the 12th, again, could be very reclusive. I could be very happy if I was I'm everything but a backwoodsman now, maybe, but I could really be that in the real literal sense. I would be perfectly content if I was in some, place of solitude, and it was in a woodsy area, and I was in like one of those log cabins, as long as I had my internet and I had access to my basic necessities in life, such as my health, things connected with health, hygiene, my food, just where I could have my basic resources and necessities. And I really do mean that. There's some other things to look at too. I mean, there could be aspects. If you have Venus very strongly afflicted, that could play a role, because Venus is about relationships. If you have Venus making an adverse aspect to your natal Saturn, it could show that relationships might require more laborious effort. And sometimes, what it does, there could be limitations in those relationships as well. And even with Saturn conjunct Venus, I think sometimes it could manifest in that as well. If you have the ruler of the 7th house, say it's in your 12th house of restrictions, that can play a role. Or even if you have the ruler of the 12th house of restrictions in your 7th house of relationships, that could play a role as well in maybe roots issues where, if you're having limitations in relationships, that could tie in to more introversion for you. I think those are some ways that could really pan out. And the thing about it, and two, looking at this, you really have to, it's really something. And sometimes when you have if you have the 7th house intercepted, that can play a role as well. A lot of times when you have interceptions, as far as that house goes, there could be some difficulty in your connections, in your relationships with others, and that could lead to more solitude, seclusion, more introversion, being by yourself. And anyway, really, and even in synastry, sometimes it could play a role as far as introversion, even if you have a very gregarious or extroverted chart. But if you have, somebody, that's dominating like your private life, you say you have somebody that's got, their Pluto in your 12th house and wants to control your private life, or they want to control, or say they have it even in there. Let's say you have somebody's Pluto in your 7th house. they might want to monopolize and dominate your relationship situation and try to almost obliterate it. Or even if their Saturn falls in your 7th house, it could manifest in that as well. They might try to limit you or restrict you in your relationships. Or if their Saturn even let's say it makes a conjunction to your natal Venus, the same thing might actually happen. They might, or their Pluto is on your natal Venus, the same. They could be very either restricting or domineering in those situations, which might inhibit you to some degree from being connected with others as much as you'd like to, and that could lead to some kind of introversion and being dominated by maybe your home life, and especially if you have a lot of a very strong Cancerian energy as far as the home goes. Like in my case, I have my chart ruler in my 4th house, which could even give Cancerian like undercurrents. I have a stellium in Cancer, including my Mercury, Sun, and Mars in the zodiac sign Cancer. So anyway, people, well, that'll conclude this YouTube astrological segment for my take on astrology and introversion. Stay tuned next time where I'll be continuing my monthly horoscope segments. 2 things I want to get with you on before I head out. Firstly, the stars may impel but do not compel. And secondly, never isolate any single astrological element, aspect, planetary placement, position, configuration, influence, or what have you, and make an analysis of a person, astrologically speaking, based on this alone, because astrologically speaking, the person is the sum of all their components in their natal chart and not just one. Until next time, people, stay well.